Hello, and welcome once again to another episode of the Patrick Perspective. As you know, we have been dealing with race, racism, and reconciliation, and this is actually part two of that series. So, many of you that have been following me for a while know that this is something that's really near and dear to my heart. It's something that I really love talking about, and I want to help people understand how we as humanity are going to deal with these issues regarding race, racism, and reconciliation. And so I want to jump right in today and just kind of give you a recap of what we went over in the last episode. If you watched the last episode at all, and I advise everyone that's watching part two to actually go back and watch part one to hear my testimony and to hear the groundwork of what I'm laying for us to cure our society. If you watch part one, you know that one of the main things that I wanted to for us to understand is that God only went to the dirt once. That is very wise and very profound of our Creator. When you read the scripture in the book of Genesis, you never see God going back to the dirt twice to make another race of people. He went one time and created Adam, and out of Adam, all of humanity was created. The woman was created from Adam. Everything came from him. But God's hands only went in the ground one time to create humanity. So that's a very important point that we have to understand when we say that there's only one race, which is the human race. That is because God only went to the ground once. And out of that brown dirt came every shade of brown that we see across the planet. So, as I said before, our history does not just go back to Africa or to Europe or Asia or whatever. Our history goes back to Adam. And even before Adam, we started in the mind of God. And that is very important to understand how to cure the issues that we're having regarding race, racism, and reconciliation. So that's number one. Number two, it is not racism that we're dealing with. I laid that out in the last episode. The diagnosis of us, we're diagnosing our issues in our society as racism when it's really not racism. It is really hate. Okay. And I believe because we are misdiagnosing the problem is the reason why we can't find a solution, and we continue to say we need to talk about race, we need to talk about race, and we're not moving forward as a society talking about race or talking about racism because we've misdiagnosed it. And I'm going to explain that as well. And when I say we've misdiagnosed racism, I am not saying that all of the incidents that we have of hate that's out there is like null and void or never existed. That's what I'm not saying that. I am saying with our language, because of the misdiagnosis with the language, um, we can't find a solution. But when you diagnose something as hate, we know what the solution is to hate. The solution to hate is to love. All right. If someone has hate in their heart, the only way that their heart will change is if they begin to operate out of love. Okay. With racism, you're simply shadow boxing. The reason being, because if there is only one human race and the idea of multiple races is a human construct, that means you're never going to get rid of it. But when it's one race, that means that there's hate there, and you can't change a person's heart, but we at least know what the solution is. There is where there is a lot of hate, there is no love. Okay, so it's just that simple. So I'm actually calling for us to start using the right language so we can heal the divide that we see in our nation. Number three is um, Jesus predicted this behavior in Matthew 24, and we went over that in part one as well, where Jesus said that we will actually hate one another. It is actually in the Bible where it says nation will rise against nation. Now, that word nation we learn is ethnos, where we get the word ethnic group. So basically, what Jesus was saying was ethnic group will rise against ethnic group. He also said that many will become offended in that day, in the last day. And so Jesus predicted that all of this behavior was going to happen. And so we're the ones that's caught by surprise because we're sitting here with these human constructs, calling ourselves black, calling ourselves white, not realizing that when we look in the mirror every single morning, we're all actually different shades of brown. And so this hate that we have for each other, and I would say it's both sides. There are people on one side of the color spectrum or the color shade spectrum that may hate people that's on the other side of the color shade spectrum. Then you have people that's on the darker side that hates people on the lighter side. And look at how Satan has really taken advantage of us. He's used us to call ourselves polar opposite for all of these years, for us to literally fight each other for our whole lives here on earth when we all came from the same dirt. And you got to know that he knows that. But somehow we figured out a way to continue to fight each other over something that's very simple that we see in the mirror every day. We all are brown dirt, molded and shaped by the loving hands of God. Now, Jesus predicted this behavior. Number four, and we're going to kind of talk about this today, and I kind of ended here last time. We must learn our true history together. And let me say what I mean by that. When I say we must learn our true history together, I mean that there is a common history that we all have, that we've all dealt with, and we have this history together. A lot of times, and this is Black History Month, but a lot of times Black people actually believe that they were the only people that went through slavery. And that is actually totally untrue. If you think about it, if you actually go back into civilizations, you will and study civilizations, you will actually find out that Africans and the Egyptians was one of the first civilizations to actually have slaves. I'm going to say that again. Africans on the continent of Africa, the Egyptians were one of the first civilizations to ever have slavery and to use slavery and actually brutalize slaves as well. And so not only would Africans later go into slavery themselves to the Europeans, um, but I mean, they were the ones that really initiated a lot of, and we see this in the Bible. We see that the Egyptians and the children of Israel were in the Egyptian captivity for 400 years. And then later on, Africans go into slavery for 400 years. So this is nothing new. Slavery is nothing new. It's nothing unique to America or to Europe. It's been happening in civilizations since the beginning of time. Now, not only did the Egyptians have slaves, but Romans, Romans had during Rome's time, there were slaves during that time. So again, slavery was not uniquely American, was not created by the white man, so to speak. Wasn't just created by Europeans during the African slave trade. That is just not true. And I know a lot of people think that, but it's simply not true. Um, so if we continue to diagnose all of these issues that we have in society, if we continue to diagnose them as racism, we will have no weapons to fight against it and to win. And this is what I believe is actually happening in the Black community. I believe that we're shadow boxing. We have no weapons to fight. And that's why we continue to see the same things happen over and over. Now, there's a scripture in the book of Exodus um, that I really think pertains to the Black community today. And in Exodus 6 and 9, it says, so Moses spoke thus to the children of Israel, but they did not heed Moses because of the anguish of spirit and cruel bondage. Now, let me say this about slavery, and I said this, I believe, in the last episode. I'm not here condoning slavery, saying that because everybody did it, it was such a good thing. But I want you to understand that if you, and especially in biblical times, if you had a debt to pay, the way to pay the debt was to sell yourself into slavery. That was the simple way of paying your debt off, was to sell yourself into slavery. Now, this is the thing. God actually allowed people to sell themselves into slavery, but he did not allow the brutalization of slaves. So slaves shouldn't have been brutalized, shouldn't have been, beaten to a pulp and things of that nature. And once that happened, like I said before, God would deliver his people. And I believe what's happening in the black community is, and like that scripture said, because of the anguish of their spirit and the cruel bondage, they wouldn't listen to Moses. Some of you can't listen to me because in your mind you have been brutalized, or you have studied slavery so much, and you've embedded yourself into all of these movies and these different narratives about slavery, that you won't even listen to the truth because of the cruel anguish in your spirit and the bondage. And so, um, it's very important that when we see this hate that's happening, it's actually happening on both sides. When you see the young white guy walk into a Charleston church and shoot up black people or black Christians in that church, and we say, "Oh, racism, racism, racism," but we also had a church shooting, I believe it was in Nashville, where a black guy walks into a white Church of Christ and shoots up people in the Church of Christ. But nobody says anything. It's the exact same hate, but we label as racism. And then in the black community, we say, well, racism, um, black people can't be racist because they don't have power. That's just totally absurd. I know a lot of black people that are racist, or let me say, I know a lot of black people that actually hate white people. Um, and so we can't be double minded when it comes to this. We actually have to state the truth. There are black people that walk into buildings and churches and kill people, and there are white people, quote unquote white people. I'm using those terms very loosely because that's all we pretty much know. So, what we're dealing with again is hate, offense, and the absence of love. Um, I want to really go to a scripture to show you um, how we can heal this divide. And it's all in the Bible. If you go to Acts 17 and 26, and I'll put it on the screen, this is how we get, all right, we've talked about what race is. We realize that there's only one human race. We realize that racism is actually a misdiagnosis of the problem. And my definition of racism is racism is the belief that there's multiple races. I believe a racist is a person that actually believes that God created multiple races. That's the only way that that term can actually have impact, is if you believe that God made two races. That's how you get racism and racist. Okay? If you don't believe that, then you have to diagnose it as hating your fellow human being or hating your brother. And so in Acts 17:26, I want you to read this because this is God's perspective on race. This is God's perspective on reconciliation. Look at this. It reads, it says, and he has made from one blood, see that? One blood. He has made from one blood every nation of men to dwell on all the face of the earth, and has determined their pre-appointed times and boundaries, their dwellings, so that they should seek the Lord and hope that they may grope for him and find him, though he's not far from each one of us. For in him we live, we move, We have our being. And also, some of you, your own poets have said, for we are also his offspring. Now, think about that. That scripture says that God made humanity from one blood, meaning that we are all God's creation. That does not mean that we're all God's children. We are all God's creation because he made humanity from one blood. And then he goes on to say he has set appointed times. So we have to understand that God is sovereign even in the times that we live in and the times that we've gone through. And he sets boundaries to nations. So there are certain boundaries to nationality and nations and things of that nature. God has done all of those things and set all of those things in order at once. Okay. So we have to understand that God is sovereign over this. And then he goes on to say that we are his offspring. We are his offspring. That means all of us. So that scripture right there should do away with all of this multiple race theories and things of that nature. Because the truth of the matter is, we came from one blood, we have one God, and he is the one that did this. Now, when we talk about reconciliation, there is only two ways forward for us to be reconciled with each other. Okay. Everyone should understand these two things. All right. And that is number one, truth. What I'm giving you in these series of messages, I'm giving you the truth, whether you like it or not. You can clearly look and see that my hair is black, but I am brown. But we have millions of people identifying as a color. Not only that, even people, Caucasian people, you identify as white when your face is clearly a tannish color, sometimes orange, sometimes red, but it's literally, if you talk to any makeup artist, they literally start with the color brown and lighten and darken from Pantone or a Pantone color, which is brown. Okay. So when you hear white pride and you hear black pride, it's actually the same type of pride that God hates. Even gay pride. All pride is rooted and grounded in wickedness, sin. And I mean, when I'm saying pride, I'm talking about you identifying yourself as a color that is not true. White pride, white power, white supremacy, all of that is the same as black pride, black power, black supremacy. It's all the same. So Satan understands that if he can keep us fighting each other and if he can keep us going at each other's throat, that he can literally wipe out a whole generation with this. And that's what's happening. This is why Ephesians 6 and 12 is so important, where it says, we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, powers, and against rulers of darkness of this world, and against spiritual wickedness in high places. Please notice, he said, we wrestle not against flesh, what we see, but what we're wrestling against is a principality behind the flesh and a power behind the flesh and a ruler behind all of this flesh, but it's really spiritual wickedness in high places. So when it comes to Black Lives Matter, spiritual wickedness in high places. When it comes to the KKK, spiritual wickedness in high places. So for us to be reconciled, we have to get to number one, the truth. And then the last thing, number two, is forgiveness. You don't hear a lot of people talking about forgiveness. But to be honest, those are the only two ways forward. We got to tell the truth and be honest with each other. But then we also have to forgive. And that's what only can happen when Christ changes your heart. That's what happened to me. I literally had a regeneration of the heart. You can do reconcile services. You can do reconcile movements. You can do all reconciliation movements. You can do all of these different things. But if the heart is not transformed, we will continue to fight each other, hate each other, and we will never walk in forgiveness and truth. So there has to be some sort of forgiveness on the person that feels like they were hurt. You have to forgive because that's why Jesus said in Matthew 24, many will be offended. So many of you are walking around offended because you're taking it personal because someone else has more than you and you take it personal. And you shouldn't take it personal. You shouldn't take it personal at all. Some of you are walking around because you're so offended, you're vulnerable to everything somebody says could be considered racist. Everything somebody says offended you. And you walk around and you will carry this hurt and this pain. You will even lead from this place of hurt and pain. This is why we see CEOs of companies and things like that trying their best to pander to Black Lives Matter is because they're literally carrying around this hurt and pain and guilt that shouldn't be there. Nobody alive today had anything to do with slavery or brutalizing slaves. There should be no apology from anybody that's alive today about slavery. We have to learn to be victors and not victims. And so when you walk around in this hurt, you minister from that hurt and from that pain. And you deal with people from that hurt and from that pain. This is the crazy thing. In the white community, even though they grow up with fathers not in the home, just like the Black community, they actually manifest their anger probably in many different ways. But in the Black community, when kids grow up without a father, all of their anger is shown in one type of way. And most of that is usually violence against another person that looks like them. That's a dynamic in our culture. And so we have to really think about the spirit of offense that we're walking in. Black History Month for me is to go and find facts and dig up things that can help move the Black community forward. Not go and dig up things that we can rehash to where the African American people are not moving forward at all. They're leading every negative statistic known to mankind, and we're only 13% of the population. So we got to think about how to reconcile this. And I've told you, I've been doing a lot of thinking about this. And I'm dedicating the rest of my life to heal this divide. Only Jesus can do it, but I know that there is a cure. There is a cure out there, and that cure is standing up, telling the truth about race, telling the truth about racism and reconciliation, and the other one is forgiveness. We have to forgive one another, and we have to forgive people that wronged our ancestors years ago. I think that is the only path forward for all of us. So again, thank you again for listening to Race, Racism, Reconciliation, Part 2. I really appreciate it. If this show is bringing you any kind of value, I ask that you at least do something. All right, get involved locally. Find a way to heal the divide. Support the police. Go into these urban cores and neighborhoods and figure out where you fit in. Or you can donate to the show. just do something to move this message forward so this message can get out to the masses. Again, I really appreciate you for tuning in to the Patrick Perspective, and I will see you on next week. Thank you.